Chargers head coach Brandon Staley spoke with the media at the NFL Scouting Combine, and he talked about how the Chargers will continue to build around Justin Herbert and give him more weapons, including bringing one of their biggest weapons back in Mike Williams. Did he give something away there? But he also knows that he has to build the defense. So we'll get into all that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers for over 6 seasons, but we're heading into our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. What's up, guys? Thanks for making us your first listen. As always, today we appreciate it. And to make sure you never miss the show, subscribe to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and also follow the show for free on all platforms. And you can hit us up anywhere, especially if you want to get on tomorrow's Fan Mail Friday episode, and we'll put out a post for that. But David, big things to get into today because content heaven the last couple of days. Actual news to talk about. We had Tom Telesco yesterday. Now we have to react to Brandon Staley today. And
hallelujah.
You might think we're thinking, defense to start, but I thought what he said about the offense was very, very interesting, including talking about, getting speed threats, getting more weapons for Justin Herbert, the continuity for Justin Herbert, and also talking about Mike Williams as if he's still on the team. But he did say that the Chargers, he thinks, will look a lot more like the personnel he needs defensively this upcoming season, which means they'll have to be aggressive there. And he also loves cornerbacks, which we'll get into. And we'll also talk about his thoughts on the new coaching staff and him building up that succession plan like we talked about a couple weeks ago with these new hires. But it starts on offense, David, and as everything does, it starts around Justin Herbert because Justin Herbert is the main man, and that was Brandon Staley's number one goal to coming in, and that's what everyone said. He said in this press conference last year, everyone was like, hey, how are you going to build around Justin Herbert? How are you going to make this work as a defensive coach, right? And he said that that's still one of the big things, but now everyone's asking about the defensive side of things, so he must have done a pretty good job with the Chargers offense. And but he talked about Justin Herbert. He mostly just talked about, how much he thought the continuity going into his second year of the same offensive coordinator. And if we know the history like we think we do, it's like 6 offensive coordinators in the last 7 years or something crazy like that. Like having a second year in the same offense, I think, is going to help him. And so will his experience. And that was the other key word he talked about a lot, David. He said he has the inventory of all these coordinators. Hey, I faced this style of defense. I've been in these situations. It's not a big deal for me. I'm just going to keep building. Now that we got to keep doing is expanding the knowledge, really emphasize the things he does well, and onboard a bunch of personnel that can bring the best out of him. And that's going to be our mission here the next 3 months. But I do think that's a great point about all that experience. Like we can expect him to get better because he's only going to keep running into more familiar defenses.
Well, that's probably true with any quarterback and at any level, but especially true for Justin Herbert, just given his history that you mentioned, just going through that many different coaches, that many different offenses, spanning back to one of his first years in college football. So the fact that he's able to, ground himself in this offense, be able to go back to all of those experiences that he did go through, draw on those positive things that he did well, learn from those mistakes that he made and those struggles that he had against some of those more sophisticated defenses. All of that information is going to help Justin Herbert be that much better in his third year. We already know he's supremely talented, but we also know that he's also incredibly intelligent as well. So he's going to use those experiences, marry that with his natural talent, and you're just going to get an even better version of Justin Herbert in his third season.
Where do you even go from where he was? Like borderline MVP candidate. We're talking about how much better this guy's going to be, and part of that is going to be bringing him some more weapons. And I think he kind of echoed Tom Telesco's sentiments with his thoughts on just, that's what we're doing the next 3 months is getting more weapons for Justin Herbert and trying to find out how to use him the best, because it's one thing to watch film on him, but now that you've had a full season with him as your quarterback, I think you know exactly kind of the type of weapons you need to get the most out of him. And I think that's what he's kind of targeting there. And one of the things that Fernando Ramirez brought up, who's on the Chargers beat as well, was that the Chargers didn't have a lot of speed. And he did say that the speed is important. And he kind of acknowledged that they didn't really have the speed, right? He said, when you have to defend the top shelf of coverage, we call it like level 3, the top shelf of the coverage, it opens up a lot for your offense when you have that threat, if it's legitimate. Now, if everyone knows you can get there, but when the guy's not on the field and everyone knows what's going on, That's not worth that much. You have to go after complete receivers. And he also talked about, yeah, you can have guys like Jamar Chase and Tyreek Hill, but those guys are doing a lot after the catch as well. So not only, David, is he talking about speed, right? He's also talking about we need more after the catch, right? And so I kind of took that away from that as well. So that is interesting because that is kind of the dynamic we thought that the Chargers offense needed.
Well, it's funny as we hear some of these things from Tom Telesco that's very, very bland, and then you hear the in detail version coming from the head coach and Brandon Staley. And also, it's just nice to hear that what he is saying is also echoing the same sentiments that we have shared and that we have expressed over the last couple of years with the Chargers. We know that, especially with Justin Herbert's arm, just imagine what Justin Herbert could do with a Tyreek Hill type of guy, with that type of speed, with his ability to throw 70 yards down the football field. Those big plays that you saw just every once in a while, that could happen a whole lot more often. And what he also said was that speed guy is going to open up things for the rest of your offense, for your guys like Austin Eckler, your guys like Keenan Allen, and Daniel, your guys like Mike Williams.
Yeah, exactly. And that was very interesting because I know we went conspiracy theory yesterday talking about, how Tom Telesco said they would hope to extend Mike Williams, and that was the plan. But yeah, it's like, yeah, I bet you hope you can sign him for $5 million a year for 4 seasons. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? But
No.
I think that was interesting, though, just because that means they're thinking about bringing in a wide receiver on top of Mike Williams, right?
Yeah.
Including Mike Williams in that combination of guys.
Exactly.
And bring someone who brings that different skill set and what it'll do for Mike Williams, which is another thing that we've talked about. Just because you keep Mike doesn't mean that you're done at the wide receiver position, even with Josh Palmer, because those 3 main guys you have, none of them are checking really those boxes. But at the same time, that is interesting because, also with that last point, him talking about the deep threat and all those things, if you know it's coming, it's not really worth that much. That's kind of how we were feeling about Jalen Guyton, right? And why he might not be getting the deep bombs we were expecting from him last year. And how if you only have him, who's not, I would say, a fully complete receiver or, an above average complete receiver, then it stops being as effective because everyone knows, hey, if we are shading our defense one way, it's over this guy. But with all these comments we're hearing about Mike Williams, David, it's hard not to take anything away from it, right? I think at this point, it's hard to believe that he wouldn't be back just from everything that's coming out.
Yeah, to me now, it's the only question that's in my mind is it the franchise tag or is it straight to a long-term extension? Just because the comments that have been echoed from Tom Telesco, from the head coach Brandon Staley, they've all been consistent. They've all been, we love Mike, we respect what Mike's done, we're not going to forget the performances that he provided to us. And marry that with just these most recent comments, everything's been consistent, and they're also all consistently pointing in a very obvious direction to me, and that's that Mike Williams is definitely coming back to the Chargers.
It would be hard to take it any other way right now. Just with, and we're reading a lot into it. No one's saying he's coming back for sure. But I think the other part of that, extension or franchise tag, when you're trying to, decide which one it could be, with the certainty they're talking about it makes me lean more towards franchise tag because you can have whatever deal you want. Mike Williams still has to accept it. His agent still has to accept it. You throw the franchise tag on somebody and then want to work out a deal, there's no acceptance part of it, right? Like he could try to hold down things like that. But once you get that franchise tag, you're locked in for at least the 2022 season. So just with them speaking with that kind of sense of certainty makes you think that they're not afraid of him getting away right now. Either that or it's the total opposite, right? But just like they're talking about their future with Mike Williams in it. So I do think that was a takeaway from this because that's back-to-back days from 2 of the most important people in the organization that are kind of either saying we want him back, or in Brandon Staley's case, maybe it's a slip of the tongue, but he will be back. And that's
he's already back,
interesting.
right?
But that's not what the Chargers take a lot of heat for. They didn't take a lot of heat for the offense. They took a lot of heat for the defense. But Brandon Staley seems very confident, David, that the Chargers defense is going to look a lot more like the defense he wants to run next year and have the personnel he wants. And I think we all know the Chargers defense needs some more juice. And I think that was very easy to see from the 27th ranked defense. But one of the other things you need juice for is the sports that you don't love as much and having to continue to watch them once football is over. And the best place to get that juice is with betonline.net, the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast. I know football season is over, guys, but there's so much great stuff on the horizon. And when you don't like a sport as much, but you have some action on it, I promise you, your eyes are going to be glued to that TV like never before. And the best place to place those bets is with betonline.net because they have the best odds, lines, and props that you're going to find out there. And there's a ton of good promotions and tournaments they have going all the time, including right now a ton of great props about the NFL Combine while it's going on. Will anyone beat John Ross's 40 time, right? 4.22. I doubt it. I'll say that. But you can also bet, will the fastest 40 time be faster than 4.29 seconds? Will Rich Eisen run faster than a 6.0340? So many great props going on with the bench press reps and everything else going on at the combine. It can be a little dry, the combine, right? Watching guys run around in spandex, always not the most fun. But when you have some juice on it, I promise you it's going to be that much better. And that's why I'm always betting with betonline.net. It's not football. It's not just basketball, right? You have so many things to bet on with UFC, boxing, hockey going on, and there's only one place to do it at betonline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. David, it was so nice to get some, actually hear from these coaches and Tom Telesco, the general manager, this week after just going so long in the dark. It was nice in this combine time, right, especially with free agency right on the horizon, to kind of get all of these things from these guys. But we knew that Brandon Staley was going to have to address the defense at some point. But I do want to thank everyone for making Locked On Chargers your first listen every day. Make sure you're following Locked On NFL as well. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL Monday through Friday, free and available on all platforms, so you can keep up with everything going on around the league too, especially those free agents and whether these teams are likely to bring these big time free agents back, because that's the one thing we don't know at this point. But we do know that the Chargers need to get a lot better defensively, David, and we talked about it a little bit in the last segment. Brandon Staley thinks that this personnel is going to look a lot different and a lot more like the personnel he needs, seemingly, to run the kind of defense he wants to.
And that's music to my ears, because that just is also, in line with the fact that, that theory that we think that he has more control over personnel decisions than we might have known previously. And I think that's a good thing. And, if the first year of his reign was any indication of that, then you have to like that. You have to like that because most of those moves he made, or moves that were made in conjunction with Tom Telesco and the rest of the organization, were mostly positive moves, and they need that same type of intensity of focus on addressing those issues that are very evident on the defensive side.
Yeah, and he said they want to be a deep team. He said you're going to hear those words a lot. I know that will allow us to be a good team if we're a deep team, and we're a team, that's complete on all three levels defensively. He said they needed to add to corners and the defensive line and the linebackers, everything pretty much. And that is true because it's hard to look at one specific area of the Chargers right now that they're totally deep and totally fine at, not knowing what's going to happen.
Can you look at any group on the defensive side and say, hey, now we're good, I don't need to add anything to that group?
At corners,
I don't think so.
Yeah, at cornerback, you're obviously probably missing Chris Harris Jr., and we'll talk about that. Brandon Staley basically said that. At safety, you feel good about the top two guys, but we don't like the depth there, with what we saw last year and how much of an issue that was. And then also along the defensive line, that's the easiest place to look at and say, hey, you need talent there. Linebacker, we don't know what's happening with Kazir White. He was the only good linebacker for the Chargers consistently last year. But the one thing he did talk about the most was cornerbacks, Dave, and just how important corners are in his defense, right? And he said, so corner is definitely going to be something that we're looking at. We're always going to be looking at it as long as I'm the head coach. And what he talked about was just that 65% of the snaps in the NFL across the league, teams are playing with 5 defensive backs on the field. So that star position, that slot corner, as a lot of teams would call it, that is a starting role, just like the third receiver and 11 personnel on offense, right? You run it so much, that is a starting position now. And we know the Chargers have 2 guys that we expect to be, no doubt about it, starters with Michael Davis and Asante Samuel Jr. But he did say Asante does have some flex to go inside, and they have seen that and trusted from him. But at the end of the day, David, they need corners. And it is important, especially in Brandon Staley's defense. And it also seems like he's kind of saying, hey, Chris Harris Jr. is not going to be back, and that's a position we need to fill.
Yeah, I think that just confirms our thoughts that we had already. We kind of knew that Chris Harris Jr. was on his way out. He had injury-riddled couple of seasons with the Chargers.
When his contract is up, so it's just he's not coming. They're not going to go.
Right, they're not going to re-sign him. Right, yeah, and they probably shouldn't. They need to get younger at that position. And this is just Brandon Staley saying, "Hey, we are going to add corners because we need to." And it's just nice to hear that those thoughts are in line. with what we thought as well. It's just
Yeah,
nice
he
to
didn't say,
hear
"I
him.
feel really good about Tavon Campbell," right? Like, or
No,
something like that.
no, exactly. And which, just tells us that he knows that he needs to add more talent to that position. You feel great about Asante Samuel Jr. Michael Davis obviously has some things that you love about him, but past that, there's not a whole lot of guys on that roster that you feel great about throwing out there and getting consistent snaps from. So they need to add more quality corners.
Yeah, and quality and everything else too, right?
Yeah,
Because the other thing that helps your corners is having a good pass rush, and that wasn't good enough either. So like
absolutely.
it all goes hand in hand, and you just have to hope they are still thinking along those lines of Brandon Staley saying, "Hey, what we did on offense in 2021 is
Yeah.
what we're going to do on defense in 2022." He says sees the parallels there for sure. But no matter what, I mean, even if you bring in it's hard to say they're going to bring in a free agent corner, maybe a cheap slot option like a Bryce Callahan or something like that if they come in at the right price. But you're probably going to have to add a rookie too, and you don't always want to have to rely on that very early on in their career. Either way, even if you add one player you feel really good about, you still have to get a lot more out of Michael Davis, which is why I'm glad
Yeah.
they it was asked about Michael Davis. And he said, I think Mike's his starting cornerback in this league. I think that the number one term gets thrown out there, but there's not very many of them in the league. I think he's improved a lot as a player. I think he has a stronger sense of his game now, especially playing in our system, which is a different system from a technique standpoint, from a scheme standpoint. I think we asked him to do a lot of new things. And there's a lot, I think, banking on this, David. I think there is a big part of how much better this Chargers defense is going to be in 2022 is if Mike Williams can get better in those, areas. And there's been a lot. There's been a lot that Brandon Staley's mentioned, but that is going to be hugely important.
Yeah, Michael Davis is only 27 years old. So, yeah, he's been in the league for a long time, or for a minute, as Brandon Staley put it in his press conference. But one thing that is very important to mention is that when he was playing with his previous defensive coaches, he wasn't asked to do a whole lot. I mean, he had pretty simple assignments in the cover three, and there wasn't as many techniques that he is going to have to ask to go out there and execute. But in this defense with Brandon Staley, it's a lot more exotic, a lot more difficult, a lot more complicated. So there's a lot more techniques that he has to learn and master and go out there and execute in Brandon Staley's defense. The one good thing that you heard out of that was that Michael Davis is actually at the facility right now working on his game, and he doesn't have to do that. That's it's a positive thing for him. That just shows that he cares. He wants to get better. And when you look at a corner and you want to build a corner out of granite, out of a statue, I mean that's what Michael Davis looks like. He has the size, he has the speed, he has the length. I mean, he has the ball skills. We've seen it. If he's able to put all of those aspects together and go out there and perform to his capability, to his potential, then you could see a much improved cornerback unit.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with that and Asante Samuel Jr. getting back to, I think, that pre-second concussion, or pre-concussion defender that he was. I mean, he was
Yeah.
really promising early on, and he still had some good moments towards the end of the year as well. But the tackling wasn't there as much. The kind of fearlessness in the tackling after, you take a knee to the
Understandably.
head from Najee Harris and you get a
Yeah.
concussion like that and two concussions so close together. Like, that's scary. That's going to make you be a little hesitant, especially
Absolutely.
right when you come back. But those two dudes, like, we're considering them starters right now. We're saying the Chargers need to add to that, but you also have to have those guys be a lot better and take the step in Brandon Staley's defense that he thinks they can take. I mean, we know both of them are very talented. Another thing we know about Michael Davis is he has gotten a lot better. We all
Yeah.
remember lamenting Michael Davis before he got the
Absolutely.
contract that he did because he improved so much over his first few years after coming in as a very raw, undrafted free agent. But he does bring the most athleticism they have at that position on a defense that doesn't have a lot of juice like we talked about before. So they need him to turn it around because if he does put it together, if he does take that step with his tools that he has, just the physical traits, I mean, that'd be pretty nasty. And that's something that would make the Chargers defense look a lot more formidable in one of the best places to improve a defense that was in the bottom, 5 of the league in 2021. But the other thing that we got to hear from Brandon Staley about, which was nice, was how he thought about the new coaching staff because we haven't got any of his thoughts on it. And he was making the connections we were making, including, Ryan Ficken, Cordarrelle Patterson, reunion time. Maybe we'll get into that coming up right after this. All right, David. Well, we did get to talk about the, Chargers succession plan. And one thing we talked about when we had all these new coaches that came on and the news came out for all those guys, the Tom Mars, the Ryan Fickens, all of these guys, was just that, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's scheme fits, right? But at the same time, what it seemed like what the Chargers were doing, there's some replacements, like Ficken's a replacement, Brendan Nugent's a replacement. You fired your
Yeah.
special teams coordinator, you lost your offensive coordinator, your offensive line coach to be an offensive coordinator in Miami.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other guys, though, it just seemed like it's like, okay, you're bringing these guys on because of the amount of attention that your other coaches are getting. And that's one thing that Brandon Staley talked about a lot, was just like how much attention his coaches got. And he also thought Derek Ansley getting a defensive coordinator
Which we
role
did not know
almost,
about.
an
Yeah.
interview for one at least. But yeah, I mean, so many offensive coaches, even that didn't leave, right, got interviews. Joe Lombardi, Chris Beatty, right? You also have Kevin Koger. Like, all these guys are going to go at some point, you would think,
Sure.
especially with Justin Herbert being there. It seemed like he was building up, his own kind of coaching tree and his own foundation to keep replacing these guys after some guys eventually leave. But Ryan Ficken was the guy that the Chargers brought in. And one of the things we heard was just how much, detail Brandon Staley's went into to find the right guy, right? Ryan Ficken was saying, hey, he was asking guys that was like, what? And like, I had no idea. He was just talking to these guys, trying to make sure I was the right fit. But the one guy he couldn't keep out of his mouth, David, was Cordarrelle Patterson. And we know, Andre Roberts did really good. I'm still in favor of bringing him back. But the other guy we've talked about potentially bringing in is Cordarrelle Patterson, who can not only, be a great return man, special teams ace, but also a running back, an offensive weapon as well. And that was something he definitely seemed like he was talking about a lot.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. Now, there are, some people out there that are saying that Cordarrelle Patterson would prefer to stay in Atlanta. But if that does not take place, then yeah, this is an obvious fit. You always look for those connections between coaches and players, guys that have worked together before, and fit and availability. Is there a spot for this player to come in and improve your football team? Absolutely. I mean, I think, using Cordarrelle Patterson as a weapon, you don't want to just put a label on him. I think this is one of those players that's better served to go out there and execute several different roles for you. That's how you maximize him and get the most out of him. Would be to throw him all over the place. I mean, kick returner, it doesn't matter. Punt returner, receiver, running back, put him all over the field. Just put the ball in his hands and let him go be special.
I mean, I think if he came to the Chargers right now, he'd be RB2, right? When Justin Jackson heading into free agency right behind Austin Eckler, got a ton of carries last year, saw him in a different role. But obviously, he would automatically boost your special teams unit as, maybe the most consistent special teams player over the last decade, like what that dude has been able to do so consistently. And he got to start with Ryan Ficken, and Staley, really talked about how Ficken ended up using him as a gunner too, and found different ways to use him, and found different players in the draft that would come in and be good special teams players. And that was something that he talked about a lot too. Also going to that point of, Tom Telesco having given, Brandon Staley more roster control. And like, even, Anthony Lynn, like we saw what he said about Kenneth Murray, and Kenneth Murray walks through the door, right? And it seemed like that was such a Anthony Lynn pick, right? But
definitely.
So it's not as if this hasn't happened before, but I think we're getting enlightened to it more now. There's more transparency there with Brandon Staley, who's one of the more transparent coaches you're going to find. But it was interesting him talking about the succession plan, right? Our conspiracy from a couple of weeks ago, bringing these guys in, bringing Tom Arth in to work with, as he put it, with Joe Lombardi, with Shane Day, promoting John Timu from being basically an intern to being a different defensive assistant, because he was a guy that was getting a lot of attention as well. And then also bringing in Mike Heaston. And I think we had it first, maybe it's an offensive line position because his dad is a legendary offensive line coach and the current Notre Dame offensive line coach. And we know Tom Telesco hates Notre Dame players, so I don't really get it. But he's going to be working with the tight ends in the offensive line. But it was great to hear him say it, because he actually put words to it. The sign of a healthy organization is when you've built a really talented staff, a loyal staff that you've developed from within that understands exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think getting the group of guys allows us to grow from within and not have to go to other places to find what we're looking for, David.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much exactly what we said on our succession plan show, which is awesome, just to get that validation. Because, I mean, those were all theories at the time, right? We didn't know that, they brought these guys in.
It made sense. I mean, it's not that it was like a super far-fetched.
Yeah, we connected the dots for sure. But, I mean, like I said, it's just nice to, to get that confirmation from Brandon Staley saying, hey, Tom Arth is going to come in here and basically get groomed to be that next offensive coach that, is going to take the place of a Joe Lombardi or of a Shane Day or of one of those guys that are inevitably going to leave. I
Right.
mean, any of these guys that are going to work with Justin Herbert are going to look very, very good because Justin Herbert is very, very good.
And get a lot of
So
attention when you have a defensive-minded head coach.
exactly. And the spotlight is on you. It's your opportunity to shine. If you go out there and make the most of your opportunity, then you are putting yourself in a very good position to get another promotion. So the Chargers trying to be agile as an organization, be able to grow, be able to promote their people, and continue that continuity in their coaching staff with coaches that they've groomed that know what they're trying to teach and how they want to get things done. So very, very good stuff from the coach.
Yeah, and you don't know how it's always going to work out, right? You don't know if just because you bring someone in to be the mentee doesn't mean that they're going to be the next great thing.
Of course.
But, Brandon Staley's bringing in guys that he believes in, and I tend to believe in the guys that Brandon Staley believes in because I've one season in, and they had a top 5 offense in the league last year, right? And all of these
Sure
coaches
did.
did seem to work out, including Frank Smith, who left. And, I mean, he's the guy that when he did leave to be the offensive coordinator in Miami, we talked about, that is a big loss. Like, Frank Smith was a really good offensive line coach coming, from everyone saying, can this guy be an offensive line coach? Because he's the Raiders tight end coach, very talented guy. But we knew how much the offensive line improved, right? So we're like, how do you keep that continuity? And that's what he talked about with Brendan Nugent, the new offensive line coach, who he has relationships with all the way back to 2011 at William and Mary. These small school guys all know each other. No
Of
surprise
course.
there. But also, was with Joe Lombardi, with New Orleans for a long time. And I think that is the nice thing about that hire specifically, David. And Brandon Staley talked about it, is just you had such a good run with that offensive line, even though we're dealing with a lot on the right side, still much improved than the seasons before that, right? So much improved. And now you get a guy who knows that offense, knows the blocking schemes of that offense. So even though this time you can't bring somebody up from within, you're at least bringing someone from the same system.
Yeah, I was about to say this is as close as it gets to bringing somebody in from
Right.
within, because this is a guy who has worked with Joe Lombardi for many, many years in New Orleans. Who knows him, knows the offensive line, knows the scheme, knows how they want to block, and so they're trying to ease that transition, make that to be as seamless as possible. And I think this was an obvious choice in the quest to do that.
Yeah, and he also just talked about, how important the offensive line was for the success of the New Orleans Saints the last few years. Obviously, last year was standing because their offensive line was super beat up. But
Yeah.
the what we've seen, is 10 Pro Bowlers, right, in his time there as the assistant offensive line coach. And maybe, now if he moves on to somewhere else like Frank Smith that he, did this year, maybe it's Sean Sarah that moves up to be the offensive line coach with another year of learning this system because he didn't come from this system,
Right.
like Brendan Nugent or Frank Smith. And then maybe a Mike Eastand is now the assistant offensive line coach, right? After he has a year under his belt, learning offensive line, switching to both sides of the ball.
You just want to hope that they continue the development of these players, because I think with this coaching staff, at least from the previous year, Daniel, you saw some players take obvious steps forward and grow and show that development that we think has kind of been sorely lacking with this Chargers organization with the last couple of coaching staffs. I can't think that you can point out to or handpick several players that you can say truly got better from the beginning of their tenure to the end of their tenure with the Chargers organization. So we just want to continue that type of growth and that type of development with the Chargers players.
Well, and the one thing we haven't really gotten to see yet is how they groom these 4th and 5th and 6th round picks, because it's too soon to tell only after 1 year of seeing,
Yeah.
Brandon Staley inspired drafts, right? We don't know how these middle round guys are going to fare yet. I mean, I think you like what you've seen with the top 4 picks from last year in the first 3 rounds. I think
Yeah.
Chris Rumpf showed some nice things in year 1. I think you saw some from Nick Neiman, especially as a special teamer that you liked. Mark Webb's kind of incomplete.
Yeah.
And,
Same with
Brendan
Brandon
Hymus.
Hymus.
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't happen in 1 year, right? And Brandon
Right.
Staley has vocalized that before too. Everyone's on their own different time. But Trey Pipkins, right, for what that dude was at the beginning of the year to when he did have to step in, he was ready. And it also made you
Huge
kind of
difference.
believe in this coaching staff from that point on the offensive side of the ball, less so when Kenneth Murray's on the field a lot, that they'll know when a guy's ready to go in. So maybe when they were holding back Brendan Hymus, still hard for me to believe Senio Kelemete was better, but that is kind of building, I think, the trust there of that, these guys know what they're doing. They know when guys are ready and they know who's going to fit the best as well. So like, I'm really excited to see in the second year how the Chargers build this team in Brandon Staley's image, because I think we saw a lot of the guys they brought in last year really work out for the most part. And I think that you're going to see that continue with Brandon Staley getting those guys, and hopefully this year more on the defensive side of the ball. But thank you guys as always for making us your first listen. Tomorrow is, of course, Fan Mail Friday. So make sure you get back in for that, because you can call into 323-524-7924 and get in on the voicemail line. Keep it close to 30 seconds, 45 seconds. We would appreciate it. And you also hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnLAC as well. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL Draft while you're doing that as well, because Ryan Tracy, former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker, are bringing the NFL Draft to life every day with the insight and analysis on college football prospects in the NFL front offices. So draft time, I know I'm listening to those guys right now, but on tomorrow's show, if you have any, free agency questions you want us to get in, if you have any questions about anything, make sure you guys hit us up to get on the episode, because we'll read your questions tomorrow. But until then, make sure to follow us on Twitter at LockedOnLAC. You can follow me on Twitter at DanTalkSports, Dave Drogemeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD. You can also find us on our new at Locked On Chargers Instagram page and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. Make sure you subscribe to us on our Locked On Chargers YouTube channel as well. As always, we enjoy doing the YouTube with you guys, the shows, of course. And if you guys want your questions, you can put them in the comments there as well. And you can also find us for free on all platforms, wherever you get your podcast from. But it was great to get some actual content from these coaches, from Tom Telesco, the general manager. And we'll be back with you guys tomorrow for Fan Mail Friday. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.